So J.R. Moore has, I have to say, he's not going to tap dance or sing or anything like that. But he is up next, and this is not going to be, it's going to be a different kind of a presentation, but you have some packets already, and we will go right into that. So J.R., come on up. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Does anybody have a hard time hearing me? Okay. I'm J.R. Moore Jr. I'm the guy that everybody loves to write checks to. My job is an easy job if you've been doing it 27 years like I have. Some of the parts of my job that come up occasionally, which is one of the purposes I'm here today, is when sometimes the people that represent us forget who we are. And they don't, I'm sorry. Sometimes the people that represent us don't remember who we are. They have a tendency to get caught up with what they have to do in Austin or what they have to do in Washington. And they think that they know what's good for us, but in their infinite wisdom, sometimes they forget some little small detail. And that's what these handouts are about today. If you look at that first one, it says the big word introduction on it. Exhibit 1 there is the Texas Constitution, Truth and Taxation Provisions. And that basically tells you that except subject to exceptions prescribed by general law, total amount of property taxes imposed by a political subdivision any year may not exceed the total amount of property taxes imposed in that subdivision in the preceding year, unless the governing body of the subdivision gives notice of its intent. That's a powerful, a lot of words in one little sentence there. And if you'll note there on the side, I put most exceptions, where they're talking about those exceptions that the governing bodies or general law might make, have to do with debt service and the way it's calculated, the way that it's put together. One of the things that I value a lot is my oath of office. I take an oath of office that pledges my allegiance to do what's right and suffer the consequences. That's something my dad used to tell me that Sam Houston said all the time. Do what's right and risk the consequences. Well, I found a little flaw in their calculations, and I found out that the debt service amount for the county, for example, when they get over to the 37th line out of 50 lines, they're using a taxable value that excludes the taxable value of your largest exemptions. And that is the over 65 and disabled freeze amount. What happens is when you turn 65, your tax amount is frozen. Not your value, not your rate, but the tax amount. And it's only that way for counties as an option and cities as an option, but a mandate for school districts. And what happens when you get that mandate, every year for the next 20 years, you're going to continue to build more and more and fast growth like we have here of over 65s and disabled. But you don't carry forward that value. You're carrying only the tax. So what happens in their infinite wisdom, the legislators decided that they would exclude that amount when they calculate comparing last year's property, which is what an effective rate is, and we're going to talk about that. You'll hear that terminology. An effective rate is the tax rate when imposed on the same properties that were taxable last year, produces the same dollars as the previous year. It does not include anything to do with new improvements, new exemptions, or the frozen amounts. So when you get this over here to the debt service, you figure out what your debt service amount is. And to get that tax rate, you divide your taxable value into that debt service amount to come up with a tax rate. And the law says that the assessor-collector shall do that. And whatever we calculate, they must adopt that. Now, general law says they can adopt something less than that, but if they want to go higher, they have to republish. The assessor-collector has to recalculate a rate, depending on what the difference on that debt service is. So we become, as an assessor, the safeguard for the public. When they adopt a tax rate that exceeds that previous year by more than $1, it triggers public hearings. We have the right to refuse rates from them until they generate those public hearings and give the public an opportunity to show up. This year I have been to probably no less than 32, 33 of those public hearings, and I've yet to see one citizen show up and talk about that increase in their budgets. So that tells me maybe the citizens are pretty happy about it. Well, if you'll look at here in a few minutes with some of my handouts, you can see why a lot of them are lowering their rates this year because we have had astronomical growth in this last year. Some of us will suffer for it, like me, when my value went up. I didn't sell my house, but my neighbors did. So now I got a tax increase, and bottom line is I'm glad I'm turning 65 this year. At least it'll freeze. And so, but the thing that bothers me the most about that is that if we look at the tax rate that we were supposed to adopt and proposed to adopt for the county this year, we would have had 3/4 of a penny higher tax rate than necessary. That represents a little over $2.9 million that would have been frozen, put into debt service, not to be used except for future debt. You can borrow from maintenance and operation, what they call M&O, which is general funds, and pay debt, but you can't borrow from debt to pay back the M&O. So it was my responsibility to go in there and calculate that and put that amount back in there. And it's quite easy to do because if you take a tax rate, you figure a percentage of that debt service, what it represents of the total, then that percentage times every dollar that you collect goes into what they call a debt service fund to pay that debt. What we did is we went back and we lowered that debt, and by lowering that debt, we now are only funding the amount of dollars necessary to meet that debt. But again, it conflicts with the law. It does not conflict with what the Constitution says. But that's just another way of confusing the public, because when I went to office, it took me 5 years of required education, certification, and examination to learn how to do this. And we expect y'all to know it by, between July 25th and the adoption of rates on September 3rd. And you've never been to school. You don't know what an effective rate is. You don't know what a rollback rate is. Well, the legislators over the years, when I came into office 27 years ago, the tax code was maybe 3/8 of an inch thick. It's an inch and a half thick, and we got a law book now that goes with it that's over an inch thick. And it's just full of exemptions. Exemptions and public information that nobody understands. That's why they don't come to these meetings. If you look at your next handout there, what I've got, if you stay with that thing now, go to section A. This is the tax rate information for 2013. There's 2 pages there. It gives you the 2012 tax rate amount, the 2013 effective rate and proposed rate, and for those that have adopted is the last column on the right. I don't want to take the time to go into this because I don't want to keep you here for 15 hours that Ms. Turner told me I could have. And so make some notes, and remember this, I am your elected official. I put my pants on one leg at a time. You call me, make notes of what you have questions about. If I don't cover tonight, I'll stay a little bit later, and if I still miss you, you're welcome to give me a call. But that's the jurisdictions that I collect for. There's still about another 30 jurisdictions that I don't collect for. And those jurisdictions are mostly reclamation districts, what we call water districts, road districts, things like that. If you look at your next one, it says 2013 property tax rates of Montgomery County, and you'll see where I've given some written notes there. Our tax rate that's proposed is the same rate as the previous year. It's a 0.4838. If you look in the center of the page there, an effective rate, 0.4726, is the rate that we would use to adopt and place on the same properties that were taxed last year to produce the same dollars as the previous year. But you can look up at the top, it gives you that amount. Last year's total taxes for what they call current was $160,514,060. At 4726, when applied towards the new value on those same properties, would be basically producing you the same dollars, the same 160 million, would be 4726, which shows that that's a slight tax rate decrease from the 4838. And when you go on down to the bottom part down there, you'll see the 0794. That tax rate is much higher than last year's tax rate for debt service. So it gobbles up that difference. But you also see there where I went in and changed that debt service and proposed it. If you look back at my two previous pages, I told them it needed to be 0.0717, not 0.0794. And that's how we brought that rate back in line. And that way we're only going to be levying a tax to pay that debt that's required. I've been blessed over the years by having a governing body that puts a lot of faith in me and my employees. They've paid a lot of money helping me to get those employees educated and certified through the state. I'm really blessed and not just having good employees, a good governing body, but a good law firm too that works with me. We exceed 99% in collections on currents and 101 overall. We are the tax office that is there for the people. I have about 3,700 people that have contracts with me that pay off their taxes in monthly installments. I've never had to take a person's homestead from them. I've never had to take a property from somebody that's willing to meet me halfway and make payments. And it's worked, and it's still working. If you look at the bottom part of that under unencumbered fund balances, how many of y'all understand what that is? Mr. Louis, you used to be a mayor, you don't count. David knows back there, but what happens is, traditionally, financially, if you want to get good bond ratings on your money that you want to borrow, you want to keep about 3, maybe 4 months of operating, plus 1 year of debt service payments. We got $150 million in reserve. That's a whole lot more than what we need. So it tells me, why are we keeping that reserve like that? So I started looking into it, and I found out all these other pledges that we have there in past due funds. It's unbelievable. If you look at your next page there, look at all of the items that are debt service. This year we listed every one of them instead of letting them clump them together, road district bonds, and have one figure. And another bond that said, unlimited tax. We made every one of them printed on the paper to show you every debt service item that we're paying this year. It's public information. It cost a little bit more. I think we paid about $40 more, but we put everything on there that's a debt service this year instead of clumping it together in categories. And you can see our debt was $40 million. So all of a sudden that 150 doesn't look like it's too healthy anymore. Not when you need another 160 to operate, or if you take 1/3 of that and put that in there, it's not really all that much difference. But when we found out we had some past due funds to apply towards that, we're only debt is only $27,469. So what happens when that past due debt stops? What happens when we don't get that $12 million from the state anymore? That's what the reserves are for. Those reserves are there. Those are funds coming from the state that are greater than what it takes to meet the debt service to pay off, or when we loan them the money to make the improvements to FM 1488, 1314, and 1485. We were the first county to be able to do that funding. We did the funding for them, and then it was a pass-through whereby they paid us on it like a toll road. They count the vehicles out there. And whatever those vehicles count, that determines what kind of money the state reimburses us. With the growth we've been having, we've been getting a tremendous amount of reimbursement. But if we don't save part of that, it's not going to pay that note 20 years from now when the state pays it off in 15 years, unless we pay it off in 15 years, and we're not doing that right now. We're sitting there and saving it, putting it in reserve because of a lot of other issues like the jail, mental health facility, and other issues. We also got the potential of 2 more bond issues that will come to you for toll roads. One will be the Hardy Toll Road, the other will be the what they call the Aggie Expressway. That'll be over in the west part of the county. It's going to take some front money. It's going to take some seed money. Like I said, these are things that you learn if you come to the public hearings and nobody comes to them. I shouldn't say that. Mr. Bowman is there almost religiously. The only thing is he's not allowed to talk, say everything that's on his mind. And I kind of resent that a little bit because I think that's what the public input's for. All he gets to do is say what's on his mind. He can't ask questions, and the governing body doesn't have to give him answers back. And I'm bringing this up because we're going to get to House Bill 14 in a minute, and you're going to be mad as hell when you walk out of here and find out why that bill didn't pass. all about transparency, and it was things that were available there. And it got killed. It got killed simply because of greed. Okay, the next item there is the update of revenues. If you'll look at that, it's dated July 23rd. That's what I give the governing body. You'll look at that on our budget hearing started on the 22nd. July 25th is the deadline for chief appraisers to certify taxable values by at least 95% to all the assessors. So we can go to the governing bodies and tell them what tax rates they need to adopt in order to fund their budgets. The 4838 is a consistent rate that the governing body always wants me to give them information on. The 4726 is that effective rate. And the 5195 is what they call a rollback rate. If they go with a rate that exceeds that by 1/1000th of a penny, it triggers a rollback. The county went through one of those in 1982, which was before my time. But you can see there how that breaks down: the general fund rate, the road and bridge fund rate, the debt service rate. You can see the 27 million and how we have to still, you can't take a tax rate and round it up. You have to chop it off. So if you got a tax rate you can only go 4 digits to in a 4838, or in this case a debt service 0717, if it's 07179, you don't get the 9/10 or the 9/1000th of a penny. Okay, so that means you're not going to get your full levy, so you better have some reserves and some delinquent taxes to collect, and we do. So we always exceed that. Your next page there is all the various line items. I produce 87% of the revenue to the county, excluding the grants that they get. If you throw the grants in, I'm getting around 77% of the revenues to the county. So my department is an important department, and we deliver early. We've already met the full revenue that they budget for the entire year as of the last day of July. So we expect to exceed it by probably, since the collections have all come in, we're already over 99%. There's not a whole lot more of those to collect with the revenues and fees coming in. We'll probably exceed it by $1 million, maybe $1.2 billion, which is usually what they use as a carryover balance for the next year. So the economy's been good to us. Also, those are the expenses. Those expenses there are expenses that are dedicated funds. I have 4 funds in particular that are restricted use and the governing body has no authority over. I'm one of 4 constitutional positions, so the governing body cannot change my budget once they've adopted it until the next year unless I agree to it. The sheriff, the county treasurer, the county clerk, and the tax assessor-collector are the 4 positions that once their budgets are set, that's the way it is until the next year unless they agree to the change. And you're fortunate there's not a one of us in those positions, and hasn't been in the 27 years I've been there, that's not willing to do like everybody else. Give it back. So start over. Let's put everybody in the same boat. But I know of some counties that are not that way. And JD probably has already heard of as little as he's been here, but and cities the same way with Gary Lewis. It takes working together. It's all part of the same dollar that we're getting paid out of. It's taxpayer funds. And we have a responsibility of working together on that. Where's Judge Mary Ann? There she is. Stand up. You didn't even get introduced here tonight, but this is one of the best county court of law judges Montgomery County has. And I know J.D. Lambright, everybody knows him. Let me tell you a story about him. I did not support J.D., but let me tell you, the people he has hired, I'm sorry I didn't support him. These people are fantastic. This guy, Bruce, that represented me twice now, one of those of nothing flat after I told him I never lost a case. JD was telling me, he says, we can't lose this. But you know what? That man came up with some things I never saw before, and I've seen a lot of lawsuits. You realize how often I get sued? You know, they don't throw tomatoes at me anymore. They throw darts and they sue me. That's what they do. And most of them are all frivolous suits, and our delinquent tax attorney gets them dismissed. But every now and then one of them slips through the crack. Judge wants to hear a little bit more about it, but they don't ever get to court. So it's amazing how people swear that they just sends me all these emails. And the judge says, well, that's strange. I know for a fact Mr. Moore doesn't have an email. Well, that whole case is thrown out at that time. I used to come in on Mondays, I had so many emails, it was Wednesday before I could read my mail. My regular mail, or answer the phone. I finally picked up my computer, my email, I took it out there and put it on Carolyn's desk and said, if I ever have to put that in my office again, I don't need you. I've never needed it again. I can be an administrator. I can go out there and I can talk shop with people. I can shake their hands. I can be a person. And more importantly, I can be human. I can listen to you and know what your needs are. Not that I can help you, but because of the experience that I'm doing, I can tell you I know somebody else that's in the same boat. And here's what they did. And just being cooperative to sit down and listen to them. And listen to those people. It's like my dad used to say, when somebody comes there that's mad at you, it's like that bucket of water. Let them finish emptying it before you say anything. And then they get through and say, aren't you going to say anything? Not till you're finished. I want you to get it out of your system. You made a friend. You don't realize it, but you made a friend. And I'll tell you a story if I get time later on about friendship. Your next little thing there, that's the copy of the law that prohibits us from using that section 2601 there, B, number 8. That means, bottom line is that you are not, these are what we call the homestead accounts. And you can't use these things to determine as a part of calculating your debt service. But I'm here to tell you, if you don't do it, you violate the Constitution. So we're going to work on our legislators to get that straightened out. We thought we had that done this last session, but you'll find out in a minute why that didn't happen. The next page is the calculation that I actually do, where it shows the debt service 27,469. The value that they gave me is on the next page there, showing us line number 37 is $34 billion. In reality, it's $38 billion. And if we adopted the 0794, we would have produced $2,941,000 more in debt service that we couldn't use. And on top of you. And that's not right. And I have an auditor and a county judge and commissioner's court that appreciates that. So we do what's right. My question to my colleagues last year is, why didn't they catch it? Some of them have been in business a lot longer than I have. And it's because they don't take the initiative to be as involved with their governing bodies as I do. They don't attend meetings for their other jurisdictions that they collect for. Water districts, at the bottom of the page, they do not have to publish effective tax rates. They do not have to follow Truth in Taxation, Chapter 26 of the Tax Code. They do not have to adopt tax rates calculated by debt service. This allows taxes to be what I call hoodwinked, is a word, the nice word that my dad would use for it. That's where they make you feel like that you're getting a bargain, because all they're required to do is compare the average home value for last year versus this year, and their tax rate for last year versus this year, and they can't go more than 8% above that, or it's a rollback. But they don't tell you anything about that debt service. That debt service goes up 21% like it did with MUD 15, the attachment there, and they're not even subject to a rollback election. A 21% increase. When you have some of the top attorneys in the world representing 90% of the MUD districts in their state, there's a lobbying group there that you're just not going to get past. I'm telling you, water districts have a lot of power to do a lot of things that circumvent what Truth in Taxation is all about. I've been to those meetings, I've told those people that, and they say, yes, sir, and they just go ahead and do what their attorneys tell them to do. But it's wrong, and we need to change that. There's a good example of MUD 15, the attachment there. All you're seeing is a $1.24 tax rate, but you're not seeing anything about debt service on there. That's the only thing they have to publish. There's not 2 public hearings required with them. There's nothing to break down how much they're paying in debt. But look what I calculate on that next page for them. I'm showing that debt service need to be 89.82. They're saying, well, we only adopted $1.24, so, that brings that down to 74 cents. So my question is, where in the hell did you get the rest of that money at? You got it from going up on your water bill. So now all of a sudden your water bill's out. But you don't have any truth in taxation that ties that revenue in. You don't even know when they're having their budget hearings. We need to get the same rules that govern counties and cities applied to mud districts and what we call the reclamation districts, like what they call drainage districts. It's anything with a road district. It's called a special district. We need to have legislation that makes them have the same truth in taxation requirements that everybody else has. And that's not going to happen without y'all. Okay, go now to the next page, and I know that we're probably in the 7th hour of my 15 hours here, so I'm trying to move pretty quickly. This one here is one that says, Dear JR, this is from our state comptroller. Government transparency killed by drive-by neglect. This is that House Bill 14. Go down that second page where I've underlined some of the things that said there. The picture even more troubling with local governments. She says she supported House Bill 14 that aimed to spotlight those finances by requiring our local governments to disclose certain information on websites and ballots. That's the one that requires the county tax assessor to take every jurisdiction, regardless if they collect for them, and put it on a website. Show everybody that wants to access it what debt service items are being paid, who's paying it, and comparing it to the previous year, and pointing out what the difference is in the new stuff, so that you're better informed as to what they're doing. I thought it was a great bill. Our state association of Tax Assessor-Collectors supported it 100%, testified for it. Then why did it get killed? Why did it get killed? Because of political interest. And it's like she says there, the bill also asks local governments to present basic revenue, expenditure, and debt data on a website. Not exactly a cutting-edge requirement these days, you'd think. But some opponents made it sound like we'd asked them to build a super collider. House Bill 14 sponsors made every attempt to get local governments on board, repeatedly trimming its requirements back. The bill wasn't just eroded, it was sandblasted. It was still too much for some local leaders who put the thumb screws on behind the scenes. Then twice the bill was killed by points of order, technicalities, incomprehensible to the ordinary Texan. I'm going to miss Susan Combs. If you go in there, what I've done is I've taken 7 pages of the 21 pages out, and I've highlighted some of the areas there that you'll see that were good bills for junior colleges to follow, for local tax rates published on the internet, the debt service as a percentage of the total expenditure so that you could keep up with what they're doing with it. At least once every 3 years, everybody with a special district had to go back to the public and ask whether or not they could continue being a taxing entity. How do you like our job? It made them have to call for a vote to be able to continue existing. Didn't matter if everybody thought the world of them, they still had to call for a vote. And in that, they had to lay out on the ballot exactly what the financial condition was that year compared to the previous year. So that the public would know whether or not they're making money, losing money, or whatever they got us into. And the interesting thing about that is today, if a company or a political subdivision goes out of business, files bankruptcy, and turns belly up, the county tax assessor has the constitutional responsibility to continue levying a tax till the debt is paid by the principal amount. That's why you can buy all the muni bonds you want to and know that you're going to get your principal back, because some county tax assessor is going to have that constitutional requirement to go out there and actually collect that money for those people that own the stock in those original bonds that were sold, where they get their principal amount left. So you can't lose in muni bonds unless the tax assessor keeps getting shot. You don't shoot the messenger. I thought that was interesting that y'all should see that, because we had so much faith in that being something that would finally help the tax assessor explain why our job was not impossible, and more importantly, make the public aware of what the governing body was doing. And Mr. Hill there, I mean, it's unbelievable what he did for Mr. Pitts. And Mr. Hill is a guy that used to be the chairman for the House Ways and Means for about 20 years before he retired. And Fred Hill's his name. And he's the guy that we joined and hired to help us get the message across. And when we do that, that's not taxpayer dollars. That's money out of J.R. Moore's pockets. That's money's out of, the individual tax assessor-collector's money, because we can't use state funds for lobbying. So we have to put it out of our pocket. And we're glad that we've got the Texas Association of Counties that helps us with fundraisers specifically for that. And they're not a government agency. That's an association that represents, like the Tax Assessor-Collectors Association, the County Judge and District Judge, County Attorney and District Attorneys Association, the JP and Constables Association. That is not a state agency. That's an association that's set up to help us as a group of elected officials to get our message across in legislation without violating any of the laws. Let me read a couple of general observations to you, and then I'll close and open it up for questions. I'm going to be 65 this year. I've reached the age where happy hour is a nap. And it's kind of sad when I look back at these things, and I try to say this with some humor. I love being a public servant. I really do. The day's going to come to a close when that's going to end. It's my responsibility to be sure I train somebody to take my place. It's your responsibility to see that those people that are being replaced are qualified for the job. I'm never a bashful person. If you ever have a question, you may not like the answer, but you give me a call, I'll give you what J.R. Moore thinks is what the case is. Always be yourself, because the people that matter don't mind, and the ones that mind don't matter. You got to look at yourself in the mirror the next morning. You got to like what you see, because you can lie to everybody but that person in the mirror. Thank you for having me here today. If you've got some questions, I'll be glad to answer the questions. Yes, sir. Yes.
Sir, you made reference to the amount of training that you had to have. Did the legislature recently change that training for tax assessors throughout the state?
No, sir. In fact, what they did, they put more requirements, because we used to have 25 CEs every 3 years. Now we have 20 per year. What they did is they took us out from underneath the Texas Department of License and Regulations, and they left appraisers underneath there. What happened is, when they changed that law 6 years ago with John Opto, they wanted to put appraisal districts under some kind of check and balance. And we didn't want to be left out, so we asked to go with them, because we felt like we need to have a certification program. But in doing so, they only took property tax. So our motor vehicle, we had 11 state agencies and duties that we do. We lost all our education on everything except property tax when they did that. So we went back and said, we got a problem. And I talked to Senator Williams about it. And he said, well, Jerry, he says, what do you want to do? And I said, we need to be able to get our own educational programs, so that we can talk about. I had 3 tax assessors in the state. I'm the state education chairman, so I know a lot about this. I have 22 courses now that we've written in the last 6 months, ready to go, that VG Young and Texas A&M and Lone Star College are putting together for us, so that we'll have education. But we lost 3 of them just simply because they destroyed permanent records that they didn't know were permanent records. And a permanent record, like a tax roll, can never be destroyed. You have to ship it to San Houston State or Texas A&M, or make copies of it. But you got to go to the state library book. If you don't, it's a Class B misdemeanor, and can go to a Class A if you willfully, intentionally, and knowingly violated that law, which says you can't do it. In these cases, every one of them were new tax assessors that weren't elected but were appointed. They walked in, and the county judge and commissioner said, well, we're going to relocate you to this other place, get rid of what you don't need here, and relocate. Well, they couldn't prove they willfully, knowingly, and intentionally broke the law, but they fined those judges $2,000 apiece, and that person was removed from office. So that's not right. So now we're gonna have things with Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. When we issue those beer and wine permits, we're gonna know exactly why we're doing that and what the safeguards are. Simple little things like vending machine co-op stuff, we're gonna have that done. We are gonna require them to take the code of ethics. We're gonna require that they do the Open Records Act. We're gonna require that they understand what the taxpayer is entitled to, and they're the purpose of our job. And we're not doing that, because all we're learning is the damn taxes. And taxes are over with after January the 31st. Sure, you get the little pieces of it, but most of it's motor vehicle. And voter registration. We're so large that we have a voter administrator, so I'm not dealing with that. But, you know, there's only like 40 of those in the state out of 254. The rest of them do that every day. They got the feds telling them what to do over here, the state's telling them what to do over here, and then the TDLR saying, well, we don't care. That person may be pregnant, but she's got to be here to take that exam. If they don't, we're going to disqualify and remove her from office. And General Moore says, you can't do that. He said, well, what makes you say that? And I said, I got an attorney to file suit against you because not even the legislators can remove a person's constitutional. It takes the public, unless we do something illegal. Well, they backed off of it, but they were glad to get rid of us as much as we were glad to get rid of them. And don't take me wrong, they serve a good purpose, but when they tell me that my people, because the auditor can't cut the check, who controls purse, hasn't paid for that test, and they can't take it unless it's paid for, and they say you don't get a second chance, I don't have a lot of good feelings towards you.
Yeah.
Not when that person's worked for me 10 years, is ready to get their state certification their first 5 years. They work part-time, or they work 2 jobs because they were sending kids through school and stuff. That's not right. And I'll stand up for my employees anytime. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Real quick, on that 2013 debt service of 40 million.
This is the last question, because afterwards, if
Okay.
y'all, I will stick around if you got questions. Go ahead on this debt service.
What is the debt that it is servicing? How much is that debt? Or am I not?
No, it's there. The 27 million is the debt service requirement.
Well, when it says debt service, I thought that was money being paid on the debt.
That is, but if you looked at the original over there, was 40 million.
Oh, okay. All right.
40 million is being paid this year, but the total debt was, you know, that's just, all I get is the amount of dollars that is owed that had to be paid between October 1st and September
Oh, I see.
30th.
You don't have that.
Okay. But I can tell you by looking at that Schedule A fund, which is the estimate of unencumbered funds, you got 150 million in there.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot more than 1/3 of what our levy is. Thank you for letting me be here.
All right, super.